to the audience. Good morning. And my name is Xiaoli, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And I want to thank our department, CUTR, CTEC University Center, and the Student IT chapter for their great help with this seminar. And today is our last but definitely not the least presentation for this semester, and we're very fortunate to have Miss Lisa Lyle Waters to give us talk about the overview of Florida airports and aviation. You might have seen her great bio in the announcement. So basically, she's currently the president and CEO of Florida Airports Council, and her responsibility includes overall administration and operation of the Florida Airports Council, the development, which includes the development and recommendations of long and short-term administrative programs and policies to the FAC Board of Directors, overseeing the day-to-day operations and the financial activities of the Council. She also oversees the FAC Education Foundation, which is quite relevant to us, which includes a robust internship program, scholarship program, and student chapters. So please check out these opportunities. And before she joined the Florida Airports Council, FAC, she also served at a number of important positions across several agencies, and she graduated from the Florida Institute of Technology, and she's also a commercial pilot. So with this, we would like to warmly thank and welcome Lisa or Ms. Waters for this presentation.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I do some speaking engagements in front of elected officials and in front of citizens groups, but presenting to students is one of my most favorite things to do, mostly because it reminds me of my start in the industry and how sort of weird it was, and I want to give you encouragement for your profession as you move forward. So wasting no time, just a little bit about myself. I'm a Florida native. I grew up in South Miami. My grandfather was a non-destructive testing engineer for Eastern Airlines. He was maybe the fourth employee hired back in the 30s. Non-destructive testing engineers are really important. That Southwest Airlines engine incident that just happened, my grandfather was the man that was in charge of Eastern Airlines inspections of all of their turbines, and they spent a lot of time with new technology, non-destructive engineering and radio. You guys probably know more about it than I do. Inspecting those turbine blades, each one of them individually and closely and microscopically to make sure that they were up to the task to take on the next flight. So growing up in Miami International Airport back in the 60s, I was born in 62, was a small airport. Eastern Airlines was its hub, small in the scheme of today's realm. And what we used to do for fun was grab some ice cream sandwiches and some peanut butter and jelly and go sit out on the front of the family station wagon at the end of the runway and watch the airplanes take off and land. And what was so fascinating to me was in particular the 747s, these 700,000-pound behemoths that were defying gravity and seemed to be arriving on a string and landing safely with everybody on board and greeting their families once they landed. So that sort of inspired me. When I was 14 years old, my father started taking flight lessons, and he asked me if I wanted to do so, and of course I did. And so I got my private pilot's license at 14 years old, and I was flying airplanes before I was driving cars, which was kind of cool. And you know, you can drive a mile on a road, but with a mile of runway, you can reach the world, right? You've heard that saying before. So when my father asked me at 17 what I would like to do when I grow up, obviously I went to what I was having most fun at, and that was flying airplanes. And my dream was to be a pilot. So I went to flight school. My dad said, well, what are you going to do? You want to go into the military? What do you want to do? Well, my flight instructor was an FIT grad. So all of you folks, keep up with your USF alumni and with your USF students and connections, because you're going to meet up again someday. He was a great flight instructor, and so I said, Dad, I want to go to FIT, because that's where I'll really learn how to fly airplanes. So I went to flight school. I got my commercial ticket. I got my bachelor's degree in aviation management, and the year that I graduated was 2 years after the end of the where the government was running aviation and airports, the CAB. So they opened up the industry to all pilots and the aviation industry. There was no longer any requirements for airports or airlines to service certain entities, so they were released to go and build their industries around the United States. And so in doing so, they had to hire pilots, and they hired them all out of the military, which in the 80s, when I graduated in 84, I was a female pilot with 350 hours of flight time, competing against military pilots with 15,000 hours of flight time. So who do you think got the job? The job I was offered was a good job. It was a job flying checks from Seattle to Fairbanks in the middle of the night for not a lot of pay. So I chose the aviation management course for my degree. And I went on into the planning and design of airports and their communities around them, and it's been quite rewarding. So, you know, my message to you as students is you're going to start off on a path, get ready for some sidelines and some curves in the road, but take them to heart. Sometimes they're good. In my case, I didn't become a commercial airline pilot, but I did learn that experience gave me knowledge and information and the ability to plan that non-pilots didn't have, because they hadn't experienced the airport environment from a pilot's perspective. So I was able to use that as my advantage. And I met my husband of 32 years now. And so that was another good thing. It set me off on a very good family track. You know, airline pilots, you move around a lot, you travel a lot, and I came to realize that after falling in love, that I had chosen the right path. Stay on the ground, build the airports, welcome the airplanes and the pilots, and go from there. So that's my story. And at the end of my conversation, I want to make sure I answer any questions for you. I had a lot of challenges in my career coming on. I want to give any insight, any questions that you have about your career path. I hope you'll ask those of me at the end of our talk. So what I want to talk to you about today, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you about the wonderful things about Florida airports and what makes Florida so special. And hopefully y'all are spending some time here. Maybe some of you will stay and spend your careers and share your knowledge with Florida residents and Florida airports in general. So let me start by talking a little bit about our Florida aviation system. And as the CEO of the council, one of my jobs is to help foster an understanding of the good parts of aviation system, what we do well, how we support our communities and our governments, and everything that Florida stands for. So believe it or not, this is a map that shows all of the airports around the state. There's 850 public and private airports. Only 128 of those are public, and that means that you don't have to call and ask permission to land there or fly there. You can come and go as long as the airport is open and manned. 22 of the airports, those that are shown in blue, are airports that provide commercial service, which are those that foster commercial transportation, the airlines, passengers, etc. I don't know if you know it, but Florida airports around the state they provide 1.3 million jobs. That's a lot of jobs. Now that transcends along pilots, designers, airport planners, engineers, other professionals in the aviation trades, all the way down to the airline support personnel. So 1.3 million jobs statewide is pretty impressive. And 144 billion in economic impact is also nothing to frown at. That's a lot of economic development dollars. And when those dollars are translating and cascading down into their local communities, it's very, very important. And 8.5% of the gross state product, meaning everything that we produce and send out of our state, is through aviation businesses. I think that's pretty impressive. So as far as pilots also, and this relates a lot to Florida's aviation history, we're number one when it comes to the 4 primary pilot training. Student pilots, sport pilots, what are those? Those are recreational pilots, those that really have, their just aspiration is to stay recreational. Student pilots, obviously, aspirations to go farther. Airline transport pilots, that's the next step. You heard it mentioned, I have a commercial pilot's license. That is a license to fly for hire. If I wanted to go and learn to fly a 737, that's a whole nother process I'd have to go through. You might already know that. For airline transport pilots, if that's your goal, you want to go beyond commercial pilot, you want to go to ATP, airline transport pilot. And then flight instructors. Those are the unsung heroes, those are the guys and gals that are trying to earn their hours so that they can take that next step up to being a commercial pilot or an ATP. So Florida, we're very proud of the fact that we populate and provide a pipeline to one of the most important industries in our United States of America, and that is transportation and airlines. So I want to touch base on just a couple of fun things about how we got here. This was part of a presentation that I gave to a historical preservation group, and it was really quite fun. So I start out with a couple of fun pictures, and you guys that have been involved in transportation, you know these dates: 1903, Orville and Wilbur's first flight. Did you know that the first flight in Florida was 1911 with a biplane that landed in Miami Beach? Florida, because of our climate and our demographics, is a very fantastic generator of aviation activity. Just a few years later, in 1914, the first scheduled flight ever in the United States of America took place between Tampa and St. Petersburg. 23 minutes for $5. Great picture, right? Now, it took hours. If you did any research about what it was like to get around in the 1900s, the early 1900s in Florida, there weren't a lot of roads. There were lots of mosquitoes. It was not really fun. It would take you hours to get from Tampa to St. Petersburg. So 23 minutes was just a miracle. So it was a very successful venture for Tampa Air. Then the next big step in 1928 was the first commercial terminal that was built in Miami, Pan American Field. Have any of you seen these pictures in some of your studies that you've done? You probably have. This particular service operated between 32 and 1945. These were the times when, to be a flight attendant, you had to be a registered nurse because it was a dangerous way to transport back then. Not so anymore. That's why you see some of these, you see the white nurse uniforms in the background in the terminal there. Those were all flight attendants. Another major Florida aviation notable is the Blimp Base in Balaka. That's in Miami, down in Hialeah. I don't know if you've been down in that area before. But this is a picture of the actual German airship that landed in 1933 and visited that airfield. And later in 1937, the airport was also visited by Amelia Earhart, obviously one of our most recognized aviation, female aviators. Oops, did I go the wrong way? I went the wrong way. So, very quickly, this picture shows, you see these women, these are all women on the airframe of this military aircraft with that beautiful rotary engine. I can't remember what aircraft that was, I should know. The World War II changed everything when it came to aviation, both in Florida and a whole lot of other areas. Florida, because of our flat terrain, because of our great weather, was a magnet for aviators. So a lot of folks in Florida built their own airfields. Some municipalities built their own airfields. Well, when the war started, the United States government came in and said, we're taking over those. We're going to take over those airfields, we're going to upgrade them, and we're going to train our pilots that are going to go into the Air Force and they're going to fight the war. So a lot of the females took on the roles of mechanics. You know, the men were out flying the airplanes and the women were doing what they could on the ground to support the training effort. So the next thing that happened was the end of the war. You know, this is a picture of a good friend of mine. Her name is Bee Haydu. She was a WASP, a woman Air Force Service pilot. What they used to do is they were hired to go in in the United States of America and in the war arena to fly cargo, to fly supplies, so that the men pilots that were maybe more qualified to fly the fighters were out flying the bombers. So the women took up the call and they performed fabulously. Bee Haydu's passed away, but her legacy lives on. This is a picture from Fort Myers Page Field. If you ever get a chance to go over there, which maybe one of your tours will take you there, they have a great display of several military aircraft, both hanging in their terminal. This is one that's right outside the front. I think this might be a plane that Bee Haydu flew back in the day. The other thing I wanted to pass on is, if you didn't know, the secret weapon of World War II, radar, was developed right here in Florida at Boca Raton Airport is where it was tested and perfected. So if you want to look up some history on Florida and how Boca Raton in particular had a role in the end of World War II, you can look that up. So what happened? So when the war ended, the United States government said, okay, we have no use for all of these military fields that we've taken over all this time, so we're going to give them back to the communities that they serve. So they deeded them all back to their communities, including Tampa. Most of the airports in Florida were war asset projects and were deeded back to their communities after becoming part of the World War II effort. And in doing so, it really left airports with what was the biggest thing? Well, how do we maintain this infrastructure? How do we keep up with the runways, the taxiways? How do we do that? Well, it became a real need and a real desire. The picture here on the right, that is Naples. That's Naples Airfield. That's a very successful general aviation airport in Southwest Florida. And the picture on the left is Melbourne. Both of those airports were part of the war effort. So it became very important for airports to figure out, how are we going to keep this asset up and how can we use this resource to serve our community? So a lot of really hardworking professionals, young professionals, airport managers got together and said, we need to go to the state government. In the United States, every state is individual. You have to go to your state and make your case for whatever it is that you're seeking to gain, and then they will approve or disapprove. Well, that's how our state government works when it comes to airports. Our Department of Transportation takes applications for grants for airport improvement, and they look at the pot of money that they have and decide how they're going to spend it. Well, that didn't exist back in the late 60s and the early 70s when airports and cities were struggling to try to maintain their airports. So Florida Airports Council was very active in working with the government to help develop a fund, and it was a transportation trust fund. And it really made a lot of sense. It basically said, if you buy aviation fuel, that expense, that investment goes into a fund that helps pay for airport improvements. That was great because that allowed airports to say, if you don't fly out of our airports, you don't pay for it, right? It also took a little bit of money from the statewide fund, which includes money that's gained from vehicle fuels. And you all have probably noticed that when you're driving around the state, you're going to pay a little bit more in this county, you might pay a little bit less in the next county. You might pay more in Louisiana or less in Louisiana than you pay in Florida. So aviation fuel is the same way. Airports, they compete with each other and with other states, but our aviation fuel tax is very important because we believe it supports airports, and like I said, if you don't use it, you don't pay for it. So the airports really strive to serve their communities in a number of areas. In addition to providing the transportation network access to their communities by air, which leads you to any other opportunity that you can imagine, they provide economic opportunities in terms of technology, aerospace, piloting, we've talked about some of those, and in terms of community support. You know, this last hurricane season that we had was very eye-opening because the entire state of Florida, at one point, almost every, if not every, EOC was activated during last year's hurricane season, particularly during Irma, because that was a storm that went right up the center. Well, that is significant because when you're activating your EOC, if you know, and you've probably studied a little bit about local governments, almost everything else stops and you get into emergency mode. And the fact that the airport is such an important role in that emergency management should not be underestimated. Airports provide open space. What you see here is the staging of all of the responders to in Naples after Irma. Naples Airport has a great open opportunity for that. This picture up here, I think, was from, might have been the year before. But you know, emergency response is one of the most important functions of an airport, and you probably have seen it. You saw it in Puerto Rico. You know, the only way to get water, food, and things to keep people alive at the very beginnings of the recovery of that storm were because they were able to get there by air. Ships couldn't get there fast enough. They had to stage way out away from the island, but airplanes could go in right away. So very important in terms of emergency response. Youth education programs, recreation. You know, those are really important because we understand that generating enthusiasm for your industry and for what you do and for aviation is important to build early on. Maybe you set that spark off with that youngster that becomes, you know, an important engineer, an important airport designer, or somebody active in the industry. So we support those programs. And individual airports are very active. Tampa International Airport, for example, is extremely active in education and youth programs. And if you haven't talked to them already, I'm sure they'll be very supportive of your student chapter. Lloyd Tillman from the Hillsborough County Aviation Authority is on our board. So I'm sure he will welcome you warmly. So I want to talk just a few more minutes about what's happening in our industry that's particularly exciting. On that top left, you know, one of the things I find most fun is this drone technology. You know, the one on the top left. Has anybody seen that in action? That is a drone Falcon that is used to chase birds off of the end of runways at airports that have wildlife issues. It's a drone. Now, there are airports that have their own live birds, and they do a great job, but they need handling. A live bird as opposed to a drone is a lot less maintenance and care. Also, of course, drone technology in terms of our industry, we're really looking at it as how we can use it to speed up construction projects, speed up inspections, improve the quality of those inspections. Airports don't necessarily look at it like this bottom one does, that might be carrying something to deliver to someone. Actually, I think that's got a camera on it to take some photos of I think that was actually of a surveillance for a power line grid, which are also very good. The other challenge, space commercial flight, I'm going to talk a little bit about that again in a minute, but that is fantastic. I've got a slide. I'm going to go ahead and forward to this slide. I participated in a conference in Atlanta recently, and they had a fantastic speaker there, and I'm going to give you her name. She's from the Space Center at Kennedy Space Center, and she talked about the space program in Florida, which this really jazzes me up. And a lot of the reason is, but I was a student at FIT in the 80s when the shuttle program just took off. So every shuttle test flight we were part of at FIT. So seeing after the end of the space program, about 10 years ago, seeing it come back is quite fascinating. So this shows you, so Florida has 2 spaceports already licensed. The Department of Transportation licenses Florida airports in cooperation with the FAA. And there's 2 types in Florida. There's the vertical launch, which is Cape Canaveral, and then the horizontal launch, which is Cecil Spaceport. That's a great place for your student chapter to go for a tour if you haven't been there yet.
Yeah, we have a lot of places to go.
Yes, because what's going to happen at, I don't know if you can see it from here. These are 2 horizontal devices. That's a spacecraft right there. Those are 747 engines on each side. This is a Citation jet. That's a spacecraft right under there. So what's happening in the industry, and what's most interesting to me, is the commercial aspect of it, and that is that we're coming up with ways now through private industry, not depending on government, through private industry to put spacecraft in the air, deploy satellites, bring those rockets back to Earth. Have you guys been watching what's been going on with the space flights and the returnable rocket boosters? It is quite cool. You have to take a trip over to the Space Center to see it, because it's really cool. So that's what's interesting, and what's going to happen is you're going to be able to take off from San Francisco, or maybe let's say Kansas City, if they have a Cecil spaceport, a horizontal spaceport. They'll be able to take off, go up into subspace, deploy that, send you to China, Singapore, India in a matter of hours, because you're going to be up in space where there's no drag, there's none of those influences, and then you're going to come back down and land in a matter of hours. That's where the industry's going, which to me is just fantastic. So the other big challenge is our pilot shortage for our industry. Long-haul pilot shortage is hurting our large carriers. There was a couple of accidents in the United States that happened a few years ago that Congress put in place some laws that precluded pilots from flying more hours. That's really hurting a lot of our domestic carriers. Those domestic carriers that have that second bullet point, that have good pilots, they're losing their pilots to those long-haul carriers that need them, and they can't backfill. They can't backfill those empty positions, so they're going out of business. And that's hurting the industry. So our Florida Airports Council, we're trying to find ways of helping stem that tide. by communication, by helping, by providing scholarships and that type of thing for pilots, up-and-coming pilots. The other thing that's important is infrastructure funding. As I mentioned, I'm not sure how much of your studies go into how airports like Tampa, like Orlando, that you might fly in and out of routinely, or even your smaller community airport, are funded. Well, commercial service airports, they have something called a passenger facility charge. So for example, when you buy a ticket out of Tampa, wherever you're going, you're gonna see a $2.50 or a $4.50 charge. That stays in that local community, and they use those dollars to build gates, to build runways, to service their runways. As you can imagine, think about it, you've got a piece of pavement, very well built, probably concrete, but you've got hundreds of thousands of pounds, you know, landing on it, using it, running over it every single day. It has to be kept up, it has to be inspected, it takes time, it takes money, it takes professionals to do that. The passenger facility charge is something that at the Washington level, and you might even hear about it if you're paying attention to what's going on with the FAA, we're fighting to get that modernized. It started back 15, 16 years ago because of the cost of money and CPI. It's practically worth pennies now. Airports are pushing very, very hard to get that PFC increased or modernized so that they can use it to maintain their airports and facilities. So that is a big challenge, and we've been fighting that for a long time. And landside and economic development for general aviation airports is highly critical, particularly to our smaller communities. If you're an urban planner, or if you know much about what makes even small communities work, access to transportation is one of those things. And general aviation airports, when a commercial service airport can use their PFC dollars, the money that they give up, that they're entitled to from the federal government, goes to GA airports. If they don't have that money, they have to keep it on their commercial service airport and use it as they can. So really, that completes my presentation. I hope I've given you sort of a little bit of information about my background, about how Florida Airports works, what we do. We are very excited to have a student chapter starting here at USF. That opens you up to scholarships through our foundation. Every year we give at least $25,000 in scholarships to students that are studying in this transportation and aviation industry. It's not a difficult application. We have a great website if you want to get on it and check it out. It's www.floridaairports.org. Go to the Education Foundation page. You'll learn about our student chapters and about our scholarship program. We also have internships. Okay, so for example, every year we give out grants to airports to hire students studying in this field. So for example, Tampa might get a scholarship for an internship. Send your resume. We'll send every student chapter's notified when those internships are announced, so that you'll know where to send your resumes. Or reach out to your local airport and let them know that you have a student chapter and you've got folks ready to go and take on a summer job or a spring job. Right now there was a time when we were only doing summer internships, but now we're doing them year round. So stay in touch and keep your eyes on that website. So what question can I answer for you regarding either Florida Airports or anything career-wise? Yes, sir.
What's the barrier to adequate expansion of the pilot supply?
I'm sorry?
What is the barrier to adequate expansion of this pilot supply?
What is
There's a shortage of pilots, according to you.
Yes.
So why isn't the supply expanding adequately?
Well, number one, it's very expensive to get your pilot's license. That is one of the big drivers. I think I read in a periodical recently that it takes $80,000 to get your airline transport pilot license and get enough hours to go and get a job at a air carrier. That's a lot of money. So that's the biggest thing. And the retirement of our military. The American military is shrinking. And so the depletion of military pilots has also hurt the availability of civilian pilots.
Was there, well, pilots are retiring, and of course that's expected, but usually with most fields, new people come along to replace the retired.
Mm-hmm. In
the case of pilots, that's not happening, and it's largely because of the expense of getting pilots license?
Yes, sir.
There, with students in most, students in universities, for instance, there are loans available to overcome the high cost. Isn't that available to pilots?
It is, and more of it is becoming available. There are actually universities that are starting special programs, and including in the state of Florida, that will help drop some of those costs, help be a more expedited program. Excuse me. Meaning instead of 4 years, it's 2.5 years. Highly expedited. And reaching out to industries, airlines, groups like ours that want to support scholarships. Beg your pardon. So that's what we're trying to do to help build that pipeline. But building enthusiasm for the industry is a challenge.
Well, so is this pilot shortage something that's temporary and being addressed adequately, or is it still a problem?
Well, we're just now grappling with it.
What?
We're just now wrapping our arms around it from an industry perspective. I'm sorry, I got a little.
She's going to try to find you water.
I beg your pardon.
Your time, no problem.
Yes, we are, but we're behind the power curve, if you will. We've sort of been talking about it, not doing enough about it, and now we're finding out that airlines are shutting down. Great Lakes Airlines in the Midwest just closed, a 40-year airline that was doing regional service because they can't find pilots. So that's a disaster. You know, that company employed many people, mechanics, pilots, customer service people, ground crew. Now they're out of business because they can't feed the pilot pipeline. So no, it's not. They're just now starting to handle it. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Another question, please.
I have a comment.
Plenty of time for questions.
First of all, thank you for being here, and also thank you for supporting our student chapter. We're very excited to launch our student chapter. And for the students who do not know, we're going to have FAC student chapter. If you have not registered, you may consider this, given all the benefits that Lisa has mentioned. So one thing is, you talked in your presentation, talked more about Florida airports. Can you talk a little bit more about FAC? You
Sure.
mentioned education, mentioned others. Can you give more kind of overview about what kind of activities that FAC is organizing?
Sure. And I'll start with the education side. I'll start with the side that would be most exciting to you and to your students. And that is our education and training program. We have a series of webinars and seminars that we do every year. We do 5 seminars. The only difference is a seminar is like we're doing today, face-to-face, about an hour and a half long. A webinar is sort of a lunch and learn, where we have guest speakers come in. We've worked with CUTR in the past on those webinars, and had folks come in and talk and give a lesson and an exchange, a good exchange of question and answer. So that's one of the best tools, is the webinars and the seminars. And the only way to be in touch with those is through the website and through the committee and your student chapter information, so that you know when all those are occurring. The other opportunities are through involvement with our airport managers themselves and activities related to our annual conference and what we're going to call our education summit now. We used to have, well, let me back up a little bit. Airport Managers Association is made up of airport managers from all airports in the state that are public use. Corporate members, which are planners, engineers, designers, consultants that work directly with airports specifically to do their jobs. And education members, universities like yourself. So one of the most important aspects that the Education Foundation gives is contact with those professionals. When we have a student challenge, which we're going to start again this year, student challenge is very similar to an ACRP project, where our specialty committees, we have committees in our organization. For example, we have a legal committee. The legal committee is chaired by the General Counsel for the Hillsborough County Aviation Authority, Tampa International Airport. He convenes a committee of legal professionals around the state that are monitoring things that state and local government and federal government is doing that impact the way airports can do business. Might be a local ordinance, might be something relative to drones, a drone ordinance, okay? We have an operations committee. That's a committee that talks about, operations on an airport is air traffic, movement of airplanes on runways and taxiways. We have a facilities committee. That's terminals and buildings. So those committees meet regularly. And participation in those committee meetings, which quite frankly, they're face-to-face meetings, they're conference calls, are available for students. The reason that it's important is, even if you participate in the call and they hear your name and you hear the discussion, you make contact with people that are in the industry actually doing the job, working in the field that you might want to work in someday. And then of course there's the scholarship and the internship opportunities. The other aspects of Florida Airports Council's work is mostly advocacy for maintaining good local support for our airports, maintaining a robust state transportation development fund where smaller airports get all of their dollars so that they don't have to go to their local governments. If you live in Hernando County, none of your Hernando County tax dollars go to pay for your airport because it all comes from the state. So we work very hard to work with the state to make sure that our aviation grant program is funded. And we work very closely with legislative delegations and with elected officials to promote things that are important to airports. And I'll give you an example. Up until this last session, it was a third-degree felony, meaning that you could be arrested and put in jail if you broke through a fence at a construction site for the Wawa going up down the street. But if you broke through a fence at an airport where there was security, safety, and health and welfare issues, it was a third-degree misdemeanor. We thought that was pretty disproportional. So we worked really hard to get that changed. We got the law changed this year to make it a felony. So what that means is now if you purposely bust through a fence and start running towards an airplane or whatever, you're going to be put in jail, arrested and put in jail for a while. So that's an example of, and there's many more important, much more important examples that I can give you than that. But that is, in terms of what else we do, is advocacy for the safety and maintenance and security of our airports around the state.
Can I?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can follow up.
Yeah, one follow-up is, are there any similar kind of the council in other states? Do you have kind of counterparts that you communicate with?
We do. Well, California is trying to pull. Well, they have an association, but it's sort of disjointed. It's a big state. Texas is trying to pull together a similar association, and there are some national associations like Airports Council International, ACI, AAAE, Airport Executives, and there is one in Tampa, Tampa Bay Aviation Association. You might want to reach out to them. They have safety days, and they have trade organization, meaning they deal with not only just the airport side, but the provider side, so like the fixed-based operators, the people that manage the airplanes, that operate the concessions in the GA realm are part of that organization. So that might be a good group to they're local, and might be a good organization for you to reach out to. But Florida Airports Council is unique, and one of the largest in the United States, and we've been around. We're going to have our 50th anniversary next year, so we've been around a while. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question. I guess this is kind of going back a little bit towards the not having the supply of pilots.
Mm-hmm.
In commercial airlines, in the face of not having that supply, are they kind of like forced to shift their gears more towards like the innovation side and like looking at either remote or automated like piloting? I don't know how far in the future that would.
That's really far.
Yeah,
you mean like automated vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, but not even like automated, but like remote piloting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like would be the first stepping stone where you have someone in a closed facility that would be pilot. Like I mean, you could potentially, theoretically reduce the space of where the pilots would be seating. And
that's a
everything
great
like that.
question, and I would bet you, I'm going to give you the name of that gal from the Space Center. She's going to come over and talk to you, and she might have a differing opinion because she's a little farther in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little farther off in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Because even with automated vehicles, and I'll tell you something. This might not have occurred to you, but the automated vehicle industry and what would you call it, revolution, has the impact or the potential impact on airports. Well, how is that? What would that impact be? Well, a primary resource, financial resource for airports is parking, vehicle parking. Okay, so if you can take a $7 Uber ride to the airport, are you going to spend $28 to park it there for 2 days? Probably not. Uber, Lyft, those are already having impacts on our industry, particularly in college towns, where college students are right up to, they're right on Uber and Lyft. In other words, at Gainesville, their parking garages are struggling because nobody's parking their cars there anymore. So airports are grappling with that in the future. Autonomous vehicles. When your vehicle drives you to the airport and then drives back home or drives over to Uncle Maud's or whatever it is, wherever their next stop is, you're not paying parking revenue. Parking revenue is a huge source of revenue for airports, for commercial airports in particular. So that's a challenge that the airports are dealing with. How do we get ready for that? We're not going to build these monstrous parking garages anymore. We're going to find another way. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, for that one, actually, Yuan is working on one ACRP Graduate Research Award. Basically, the topic is impact of autonomous vehicles to airport planning, design, and operation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing some mathematical programming, modeling on how to quantify the impact to the airports. And then we talked to some airport operators. For example, Tampa International Airport, what they're doing now is they're charging the TNC companies. They're charging Uber and Lyft for like $5 for entering into the
They have to.
Yeah,
They're required to.
Right. So in that sense, they could somehow, kind of compensate the loss of the revenue.
Yeah. If you're doing a study, talk to Alan Pengska. He's our former chairman of the board. He's from Gainesville. He is right there in Gator World. He can talk to you very frankly about the impact of maybe not autonomous vehicles, but the path to autonomous vehicles is this Uber and Lyft. It's just the next step, right? Once we get, particularly the older generation, us that are not as adaptable as some of the youngsters. Once you get the older generation up with Uber and Lyft, the very next step is autonomous vehicles.
And in terms of Richard, in terms of the remote autopilot
Yeah.
piloting. I think in the research area we had lots of discussion, and the thing is there's ethical kind of barrier
Yeah.
to do so, because when the pilot in the flight versus not in the flight, during the emergency, their decisions could be different.
Yeah.
So that is something to
they're
prevent us from, especially for the commercial passenger flight.
Because they're more personal risk for a pilot that's actually in
Right,
there.
right. But we are seeing the commercialize of the, UAS, the manned aerial systems,
The drones,
starting from the small UAS, and
Yeah.
now I think in the future we'll go to the large UAS, maybe starting from carrying the cargo.
Yeah.
So we are seeing the path going there, but it, as Lisa said, it could be slow.
Yeah. Makes
Very
sense.
slow. And the other thing we didn't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm thinking about the shortage of pilots, commercial airports. Why does not? I think the airlines can pick some people they think qualified and train them in the school, and maybe later they will become pilots that belongs to the airline. I think it's a good strategy. If they,
Kind of
pick
like they
somebody.
pay
A lot
their
of
way
them
through
do that.
school and then they're
So it's
service.
not so expensive anymore because they don't need to pay anything to be trained as a pilot, right?
A lot of them do that, but and I don't know how that program works long term. I don't know if they're able to retain them as long as they would like to,
They can sign a track like 10 years. They have to be
Yeah, yeah. So the thing is just we've got to fill that pipeline of youngsters interested in the industry to become pilots. One thing we didn't talk about, and I want to ask you folks, how up on this augmented intelligence are you guys when it comes to aviation and transportation? Because this is the next thing that's going on with terminals, is where if you've got Google Glasses or if you've got a device, you can tune in and find out as you're walking through the terminal, what's coming up. It's almost like, you guys remember the movie, what was it, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator. When everything was coming up. That's what's going on in terminals now. This is a terminal, I think, in Germany. Who knows what language that is? I don't. But it's coming to the United States of America, and our airports and our consultants are working very hard to get the expertise to bring this to our terminals. So, just a question for you. If you don't know about it, look into it, because it's really kind of cool. Another one of those things where you go into a field thinking this is what you're going to do, but hey, something sparks, and it's something that you're interested in, and you can go far. So keep your mind open. Any other questions? Okay.
I mean, this augmented intelligence is pretty cool technology, but I have an experience every time I use the augmented intelligence, I feel just dizzy in my head. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I just feel dizzy. And I look at this 3D graphs.
It's just too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Maybe
figure that out.
when people are designing this technology for the airport, they should consider there are a portion of people that just feel dizzy. They can't use this technology.
Yeah, it's very polar. There's people that love it, and people and I'm sort of with you. I haven't really gotten to where I understand how it's going to help me. Right now, it's still sort of confusing to me. But maybe the youth of the day, these 3-year-olds that are already doing their own computer languages. Maybe that'll make sense.
They will get used to it.
Eventually. Any other questions? Okay, please don't leave. I want to take a picture.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to take a picture of all of you guys. Okay, so why don't you just stay where you are, or you might have to scoot in a little closer, because I'll tell you, our association is very proud that your group is entertaining me today, and that you're starting a new student chapter. So we want to welcome you.
Scooch in, guys. Get close.
And you know what? Let's get me out of that. Back a little farther. All right. Smile. Cheeseburger. One more. thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Do you
And
wanna-
thank you for having me.
Lisa, do you want to sit here and I can take a picture?
Oh, no, that's good.
Yeah, sure.
They've seen me in a picture before. Unless you want to.
Yeah, I want a picture. Let's have a
Okay,
picture
sure,
together.
sure thing. I'll come